Gentlemen, let's start from the most important, most basic question. I would like to know what is taxation according to each one of you. How do you define it? Let me hear your thoughts about that.
It's a compulsory contribution to state revenue.
Very well. Jacek, what do you think?
These are taxation. Basically, it's all about involuntary payments to a third-party institution that claims its own share for our win-win exchanges. It's like this third guy who is sitting between you and says, "Give me a part of the cake," when there is nothing for him really. So sometimes we say that okay, some taxation is necessary to maintain a minimal state, but it doesn't change the nature of taxation, which is theft, and is way too big.
Definitely, thank you so much for bringing this up. So before we talk about possible ways to avoid taxation, we are being live streamed on YouTube, obviously, so we are expecting some of the IRS agents to be watching us, so we would like to give a big shout out to IRS. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment. There's around 90,000 of IRS agents out there, so we will be able to generate pretty good numbers for our YouTube channel. So guys, I'm sure we are aware of all the taxes we pay basically every day, anything we do. Let's start from the absurdity of taxation. Would you be able to share with us any examples of like ridiculous taxes imposed either in your countries or in US? Doesn't really matter, just to kick off the discussion. Toine, you want to start?
Well, ridiculous taxes that sometimes make some people laugh would be the tax on beards introduced in Tsarist Russia, the tax on windows in England in around the 1700s that caused people to build homes with very small windows or even put bricks in the windows that they already had. There's been a tax on urine in the Roman Empire, because at the time it was considered valuable because people used it to brush their teeth, and it was also used to clean clothes with. But on a more serious note, there are also taxes that are extremely counterproductive in the sense that not only does it mean that the taxpayers are robbed of the fruits of their labor, but even the government that it's supposed to fund is losing revenue as well. So even the goal of government revenue isn't even met. There's a theory developed by an economist named Arthur Laffer. He developed the Laffer curve, and his basic position was if government were to tax zero, the revenue would be zero. If government would tax 100%, revenue would also be zero because nobody would produce anything anymore. And somewhere in the middle is a sweet spot from the government's perspective, from the IRS's perspective. That's a sweet spot where they maximize revenue. Of course, my sweet spot is zero, but their sweet spot is somewhere in the middle. But what's happened many times, especially in the 1960s and 70s, but still to this day, what often happens is that politicians raise tax rates so high that they're past that sweet spot even from their own perspective. And what we've seen is that when taxes are reduced, when tax rates are reduced, often revenue goes up. When Ronald Reagan took office in 1981, the maximum tax rate in the United States was 71% for the federal income tax. There were state income tax on top of that, but just the federal income tax had a maximum rate of 70%. When he left office, it was 28%. Because it had been gradually reduced throughout his 8 years in office. At the same time, the revenue of the US federal government quadrupled. And the amount of taxes collected, the amount of dollars collected from taxpayers with an income of over $200,000 a year, that quintupled. So obviously the US had been on the wrong side of the Laffer curve. Because otherwise you can't explain why tax cuts generate more tax revenue. But this is not unique to the United States. This was actually very, very common in the 1970s. The United Kingdom had a maximum personal income tax rate in the 70s of 83%. For labor income, for investment income, was even 97%. When the Margaret Thatcher took those rates down to 40%, revenue went up. Recently, we've seen the same thing with the wealth tax in Norway. Most countries have done away with their wealth tax over the last 20 years because they discovered that it was costing them much more than it brought in. Unfortunately, in Norway, the opposite happened about a year ago now. They raised their wealth tax. And as a result, the most productive people in Norway announced that they were going to move to Switzerland. And they calculated how much the effect was of raising their wealth tax. And then what they found is that it was costing them hundreds of millions of euros in lost revenue. So this is quite a common problem still in today's world.
Thank you.
So there are many different examples of absurd taxes. I will bring one from our country, from Poland. Do you know that in Poland we have a sugar tax because government really wants us to drink less soda and other drinks with added sugar? Well, do they really want us to drink less? No, of course not. They want us to drink a lot so we can produce revenue. Coca-Cola in Poland is nearly twice more expensive than in the United States. And we are talking about a country that is, okay, maybe growing and getting richer, but still way poorer than the United States. But it's not only that. I'll tell you about the absurdity of this sugar tax. It's about sugar added to the drink. So, for example, water is not subject for that tax. And juice, if it is a properly done juice, just from the fruit, of course it's sweet, but it's a natural, these are natural sugars, right? This is not sugar added. So juice is not taxed. But if you mix sugar, if you mix juice and water, for example, you create a drink that is 80% juice, 20% water, yes, you are a subject of the tax. So then suddenly the sugar appears in the equilibrium and they tax it. But okay, the case of Poland is irritating, but it's not as dramatic as some other absurd taxes that I noticed in my life. I was a few years ago in a beautiful country named Nepal. And not without a reason, we chose at Liberty International Nepal as the country to run Phoenix from the Ashes, so which we call Reverse Project Arizona, project for American students who will go to see socialism in action. So I'll tell you an example. In Nepal, they have various taxes on so-called luxury. So what is luxury in Nepal? A car is a luxury. Okay, in Kathmandu, I took a cab. It was a very small Hyundai, I think something like Hyundai Atos, really small car. And there are not many cars. Mostly these are tuk-tuks, mopeds. Some people still use animals. And I asked the driver, "Sir, how much this car did cost you?" And he says, $25,000. And I say, wow, in Poland you can have nice mid-sized car, actually very nice mid-sized cars. And in the United States, even something better. And here this tiny Hyundai, which was not even new. And he says, and you know, I will be paying back this car for next 30 years. So this is really, really sad, and this is stifling economic growth. This is a burden on families. They cannot do business, they cannot produce value because of all these crazy ideas of luxury. I heard about a student from Nepal, or maybe it was an activist of think tank, who wanted to fly to United States, and he dared to have 2 laptops. And they kept one at the border, at the Kathmandu airport, saying, 1 laptop is enough. Why, if you have 2, we take one. Another example are mopeds, these small motorcycles. Usually people buy those to transport human and other men and goods because they're still much cheaper than cars and they burn less gasoline. Biratnagar is on the side of Nepal. And there is another town, I don't remember the name, on the side of India. And the people are very similar, and the culture is similar, and business is similar. Yet, the moped in Nepal costs 2.5 times more. Why? Taxes. Yes, these are taxes. Because it's luxury. The government of Nepal claims it's a luxury, so the Nepali people must pay. And Nepal is way poorer country than India as a result. And we are talking about real poverty. I saw people lying on the ground with little lamps. And I believe perhaps some of them spent days like this. I saw people living in the convention stores. We went there to buy some simple goods, maybe beer it was, or maybe chocolate. Lady opens, and I see the whole family lying on the floor because it was evening. This is true poverty. And the taxes, including these absurdic taxes, they are supporting poverty. They are putting people into poverty. And I want to finish this portion of our discussion with saying that I also believe that it is an absurd not to call a tax what tax is. And in Poland, this is our specialty. So for example, in our country, the income tax is not that big, to be honest. Okay, I would prefer it to be 0 or maybe 5%. It's more, but it's still kind of like 12, 18, and the highest is 36. Okay, that one is too high. But the income taxes are not horrible in Poland. Social security contributions, these are big. And they are compulsory, and you need to pay them from every salary, including the smallest one. And we are talking about 35, 40%. Are they called taxes? No. Are they voluntary? Oh no, they are not voluntary at all. They're compulsory, like taxes. It should be called tax. I think this is an absurd not to call it.
Yes, and they will call it anything but the tax, definitely. So here in US, there's something called sin tax, right? So let's say last week we went to Vegas to meet Mark Skousen during the Econo Summit, and the nanny state that definitely US government is a nanny state to some degree, will impose those taxes on things like gambling, let's say prostitution, alcohol, drugs. So my question to you guys is that do these taxes really work? I mean, so what is the actual outcome? Let's say that we tax on alcohol and we make people pay a higher price for a bottle of liquor. So what is the actual impact? Like, do these individuals really drink less or like do less sins?
Of course. I mean, if you raise the price of a bottle of wine to $10,000, obviously people drink less wine. And that same principle applies even if you raise the price by just $1. That has an effect. People respond to prices, and so in that sense, you could say it works. But of course, capital punishment also works. If the UK had a tax on hats, and you had to have a stamp inside your hat to prove you paid the tax. If you didn't, there was capital punishment for not paying the hat tax. It works. People made sure they paid their hat tax. Just because it works doesn't mean it's right. If it's an immoral thing to do, if it's a violation of individual rights, the fact that it works is actually part of the problem, part of why it's such a bad thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. They disincentivize in the first place. So in high tax regimes, people just do less. Because why to do all these things? Why to be rich? Why to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning if this sad man from IRS will come, knock to your door and say, please pay me this 50% or whatever taxes. They also put us into gray or black markets, and they make us poorer. I mentioned that one. Even here, being in the United States, I often check how much different models of the cars cost, and I cannot imagine. Literally, it's between 2 to 2.5% times more, so 200 to 250% more than what we pay in Europe. And are we that rich in Europe? No, we are poorer. We poorer people in Europe pay 2 to 3 times more for the same cars than Americans. Why? Taxes and regulations. They are brothers, right? Taxes and regulations. So, but there's one good thing about taxes. There is one good thing. I think they make us smarter, and we start thinking more, okay, how to find ways. And we'll talk more about this later.
Exactly, that's exactly what we are going. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are trying to make this panel as much relevant as possible to the international audience, right? Because we all know that every tax system, actually here in US, every state has a different tax system. So, let's try to break down some of the legitimate strategies that we, as individuals, can deploy to lower down our taxes. Once again, like understanding that our situation every time is different, and but what can we do as the citizens of the world these days having access to internet? Toine, would you like to start?
Yes, of course. So there are several strategies, but usually the best strategy for just about anyone is to move to a country with lower taxes. If you stay in the same high tax country you're living in, there usually are things you can do to reduce your tax burden, but usually by leaving the country, your tax savings will be much, much higher. Furthermore, the risk that you'll get into a debate with the taxman is a lot smaller. The risk that you'll have to go to court to win your arguments against the taxman is much, much smaller if you're going to move to a low-tax country. Because low-tax countries typically have friendlier tax offices. They're not usually as aggressive as the tax offices in high-tax countries. Furthermore, a lot of these low-tax countries have even lower taxes for foreigners because they realize that it is smart to attract foreign business owners, foreign entrepreneurs, foreign investors with low tax rates and with a low burden of regulation. And these countries that have a specific government policy to attract foreign business owners, foreign investors with better tax rates, with better tax policies, typically they won't be as aggressive in pursuing the highest amount of tax, like the tax offices in high tax countries are. And the good news is there is not just 200 independent countries that can set their own tax rates. There are even 80 jurisdictions that are not independent countries that can also set their own tax rates. And that means there's 280 jurisdictions to choose from. And fortunately, Joe Biden's plan to have a worldwide tax cartel where all countries must charge a minimum tax rate has only been partially successful. It's been fairly successful for large companies that have over 750 million in revenue. There's about 133 countries that signed up to introduce the minimum corporate income tax, 15% for those entities with over 750 million euros in turnover. It's horrible that it's happened, and I'm worried that they're going to bring down that threshold, as usually happens. But it hasn't happened yet. So in today's world, unless your turnover is over 750 million, you can still benefit from moving to a low-tax country. You can even move to a zero-tax haven. There's plenty of those. In the Caribbean, there are about 10 countries that do not have any income tax. The Bahamas being the biggest and most well-known of these Caribbean zero-tax havens. There's a lot of Islamic countries, mostly on the Persian Gulf, that have zero income tax, like the UAE, most famous for Dubai. There are other countries that have zero income tax, even in Europe. Monaco has zero income tax. There in the South Pacific, there's a few countries that have zero income tax. But there are other ways to escape tax. There are also a lot of countries that do not tax foreign-sourced income, that only tax locally sourced income, which means that if most of your income is from overseas, you can live there and not pay the tax. Countries like Costa Rica, Panama, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, the Philippines, Malaysia, the Republic of Georgia. And there's many dozens of more countries that have zero tax on foreign sourced income. There are a lot of countries that are high tax, but have introduced a low tax regime for foreigners. Many of these countries are in Europe, places like Malta, Cyprus, Italy, Greece, Switzerland. So those are also of interest. Then there's countries that have low taxes for everyone, not just foreigners, but their own population too. They levy it on worldwide income, but the rate is fairly low. For instance, Bulgaria, 10%, Romania, 10%, Macedonia, all of these, most of the Balkan countries have a tax rate of 10%. Guatemala, it's 7%. So there are many options out there. Most of the clients I advise, they're usually Europeans and usually want to stay in Europe or don't want to leave. They want to be close to Europe. So most of my clients usually wind up in Malta, Cyprus, and the UAE, in Dubai. So typically these would be the countries that most people think have not just the advantage of low taxes, but they're also really nice places to live for multiple reasons.
I wonder who's already Googling how much are apartments in Costa Rica or in Cyprus and how much are flight tickets. Jacek?
Yes, I agree. Moving is one strategy, but for many people, especially if they have families, it's not that easy, right? In that case, what to do? Look for a libertarian or at least freedom-minded tax advisor. And especially in my country, in Poland, I see sort of revolution of tax advisors recently. One of them, very free market-oriented guy, is running for president of Poland. And I think he can get easily 8 or 10%. And of course, being in politics helped him, but he merged it with this anti-tax message, or actually very practical guidance for people how to reduce taxation. I remember he had this advertisement towards IT folks, and Poland is known for quite strong IT sector. We have really low taxes for IT. The bad side is that we should all have low taxes, not just IT people, but that's what it is. So this and either anti-tax or calling for lower taxes, this is popular. This is gaining traction, and even in our Polish foundation, Freedom Entrepreneurship Foundation, we have a colleague who actually worked under Mens and the guy who is running for president of Poland, and he's now he's very good tax advisor. I talk about Aleksander Serwiński, and we have entire series of video podcast about reducing taxes legally, and this is under auspices of FEF, and this is one of the most popular. These are one of the most popular videos we ever produced. So this topic is becoming popular. This is one of the ways we can win hearts and minds of average people. This is the way we can win hearts and minds of business people. This is the way they can discover libertarianism. So taxes are bad, but they can be the entry gate towards ideas of liberty for people who are more into economics, more into business, but they don't like paying those. Most of them don't like paying these taxes because they are way too high in most countries. So there are good strategies, and I'm happy we have this panel.
Yeah, especially, yeah, you want to add some?
Oh, yeah, another method is to become a digital nomad. If you don't live anywhere, if you're constantly traveling, if you're a permanent tourist, tourists are typically treated very well by governments compared to their own subjects. Tourists typically are not bothered with the duty to pay tax. They're usually not bothered with the duty to serve in the military. They're not usually bothered with the duty to send their kids to school. These things are for subjects, but not for tourists. So if you're a permanent tourist, then none of these duties apply to you. This has been a strategy that's worked for forever, basically. Unfortunately, there's one little problem that's come into existence over the last, especially over the last decade, which is that all the governments in the world have started forcing the banks to enforce so-called anti-money laundering laws. And these laws are getting stricter and stricter, and these days the governments are forcing the banks to ask their customers for a proof of address, and often they also ask for a proof that you pay tax. And if you do not deliver the proof, they shut down your bank account. So if you're planning to live nowhere, to be a true digital nomad in the sense you have no address anywhere, no country where you're registered, what you'll find is even if you start out with 20 bank accounts when you start this journey, you're going to lose them all one by one. So the way to solve this problem is usually to have a country where you can become a tax resident fairly easily and fairly cheaply, so that you can show your bank that you do have an address and you do pay tax somewhere. It just happens to be the kind of country where only foreign sourced income is taxed, which you don't happen to have. So what a lot of digital nomads do these days is they have a registration, they have an address in a country like Paraguay or Georgia or the Philippines. They don't spend a whole lot of time there, but they can show the bank what the bank wants to see, and that's how they keep their bank accounts while they're traveling.
And I want to add that at Liberty International, in our research department, we have just developed an entire index for digital nomads. It's called Digital Nomad Tax Freedom Index. As you know, we want to make LI more and more practical organization. We sometimes call it practical libertarianism, so that people can take this freedom and make it theirs and grow and become happier and freer. So this index is about digital nomad visas. Obviously, not every single digital nomad wants this kind of visa, because there are some digital nomads who basically change country every week, and maybe they're not subject for these visas, but there are many people who are not yet digital nomads, and they're just thinking about it, and this is the spark in their mind. And here we are with this index, where we want to show better the countries that will make it easier for them to prosper. The countries that will not steal money through taxation. There are a lot of indices online about speed of internet, or is it cold or hot in the country. We don't care. These are issues that people have different preferences. But we are dealing with concrete matter. How much tax will they take from you? What is the social security situation? Do they also tax from that angle? And what is the bureaucratic procedure? Easy, medium, hard. So very practical. And this is yet another way how to pressure countries, governments, to lower taxes. In today's world, we see opposite happening a lot, right? There is a pressure to grow taxes, usually. What was mentioned about Joe Biden, United Nations has their agenda. I just learned that in European Union we'll have new climate tax that is imposed by European Union. There's a lot of bad pressure, but good pressure also exists. And digital nomadism, which is growing phenomenon, is this good pressure to lower taxes, at least for the ones who work remotely. And you know, this quest of people to be free and go where they wish and work from their laptop, well, I don't think that it can be easily stopped. It can, of course, we saw COVID, right? But so far, the ability to move from country to country, we still see that this is being accepted and cherished. So if we want to focus on positive, on the glass to be half full, then digital nomad revolution, that's where we as libertarians should closely follow it, or maybe become part of it even.
The information I gave applies to citizens of all countries except two, which is the United States and Eritrea, because these two countries tax our citizens on their worldwide income, even if they're no longer residents. It's not impossible for Americans and people from Eritrea to avoid tax. It's just harder. And usually the benefits aren't as high, unless you move to Puerto Rico. If you're an American moving to Puerto Rico, then you're outside the scope of U.S. federal income tax. You pay your business pays 4% corporate income tax, and dividends and capital gains will be tax-free. So that's a unique way for an American to escape U.S. federal income tax without renouncing U.S. citizenship. At the beginning, I said, even if you stay in your own high-tax country, there usually are ways to avoid tax, even then. Typically, what this involves is using life insurance, or using a charitable foundation, or using a private foundation, or a trust. Usually there are strategies you can use to lower your tax burden. It will never go down to zero. And you need to be extremely careful when you use these strategies, because your tax inspector will be very keen to be very critical and to look for any mistakes you might have made. So it's possible, but you have to make sure you know what you're doing and get proper tax advice.
Thank you so much. So before we open up to the questions from the audience, gentlemen, let me ask you about the future. We have recently witnessed the election, presidential election in U.S. There's a new cabinet that's being under construction. So let me ask you about, like, how do you feel about the future? Like, can we expect some positive changes? Any promising tax reforms in favor of taxpayers? Obviously, what are your hopes when it comes to US? Feel free to also mention about the Europe. It's way more difficult, I guess, in Europe. So let me know your thoughts about the future here.
Portugal used to have a really great tax regime for foreigners called NHR, non-habitual residents, where people had not
golden visa, yes?
Sorry?
The so-called golden visa?
No, that's a different thing. This is a tax regime. You can combine it with a visa, but if you're an EU citizen, you don't need a visa to move to Portugal. They had a great system. Unfortunately, the government pretty much abolished it on January 1st of this year. Then the government lost the elections, and the new government was elected, and they, well, I wouldn't say promised, but they said they were going to bring it back in some form. But they haven't so far. I hope they will, because it used to be very popular. A lot of people are very keen on moving to Portugal to take advantage of it. So if they do bring it back, that would be a great thing. Another example, I don't think that's going to happen. It would be great if it did, but I'm extremely skeptical. Of course, Trump said he would want to replace the income tax with tariffs. Now we all know that tariffs can only be raised so much, because if they raise them even higher, then it'll bring in nothing for the government anymore. If foreign goods, if they are just way too expensive compared to domestic goods, people will stop buying it. So one advantage of a tariff, in a way, is that it is a brake on government revenue. Government can never grow more than a certain level if all your income is just tariffs, like the U.S. used to have prior to 1913. The U.S. federal government had pretty much only one source of revenue, which is tariffs. Of course, they spent very, very little money at the time, like less than 2% of the national income. That's why it was feasible to have a federal government run just on tariffs. Now, if Trump really meant that he wanted to cut government back to a size so small the government could survive on just a tariff and do it with the income tax, that'd be great, but I'm not holding my breath.
So, well, I believe that government that aims to reform towards more freedom and prosperity should start with actually cutting spending, not lowering taxes. I'm all in for lowering taxes, but I think cutting spending should be first. I often saw the situation that they were cutting taxes, not lowering, but growing spending, and then they couldn't find a balance, and there was like major problems, socialists back in power, stuff like that. President Milei is sometimes criticized, like why he has not yet cut the taxes. He's focusing on cutting spending right now, and I think this year, we talked with Gabriel a bit about this, next year, 2025, this will be the year for cutting taxes. Hopefully Argentina will give us some shiny example. I believe everything goes towards flat tax. It's not perfect, but it's way better than any progressive tax. I have a big problem with progressive taxation because for me and for all of you, I guess as well, is basically punishment for being more productive. You are more productive, you are better, bam, punishment, bigger tax. And we have this progressive taxation. It has many faces, basically, because it's not just about taxes. It's also about the entire system of regulation and subsidies and grants. For example, if there's in some countries that are a welfare state but pro-family, kind of right-wing welfare state, then you have children. They pay you money for having these children. Or in other countries, a more left-wing welfare state. If you are a single mother, then you get rewarded. This is all crazy, right? We, as classical liberals or libertarians, we want simplicity, not only because of utilitarian results, obviously they are better, but also because this is moral. It is moral to treat people equally. Equality, one equality is good, equality in front of the law. And if you start progressive policies, you will never have equality in front of the law. So, coming back to your question, I hope President Trump's administration will lower income taxes, but same time, as I mentioned, the even bigger hope is on the spending side, because I believe no single president of US since Calvin Coolidge reduced its budget and cut spending year by year. That happened also under presidents such as Ronald Reagan, who was generally pro-free enterprise, but even back then the spending was growing and growing and growing. And one more thing I want to stress is, let's remember, income taxes are not the only taxes. So they already understand, when I say they, the governments, they already understand that we are watching them regarding income taxes. And I don't think these taxes like in 70s, these crazy 80% highest rates, will get it back. Probably not. Maybe in countries like Venezuela it's possible, but I don't think that's the real risk in the Western world. What is the real risk is they are adding many more taxes that they were never there before. Things connected to social security and not called tax, things connected to climate change, things connected to your customer behavior. Oh, you're eating too much sugar, boom, taxed. You drink alcohol, tax. Oh, you smoke marijuana, tax here. This is very dangerous, and I think we'll see more and more. They call them small taxes, but still, if you collect all of these taxes together, then the final picture of those can be quite dramatic.
Definitely. Yes. Let's before we open it up, we have a couple more minutes, I believe. Let's end on this note that we, as libertarians, free marketers, classical liberals, you name it, we are anti-tax, not because we are paid by huge corporations. Oh, we wish we were, because those giga mega corporations, they will always find their way around. They will move outside us and they will pay zero tax. But who will pay taxes? Like people, working class, people at the bottom, people just like us.
And many big companies actually don't have a problem with bigger taxes, because that's the way to reduce competition from the middle and the small, who struggle more than the big ones.
Definitely, definitely. So I would like to open the floor to the questions. We have 5 minutes. We can take 1 or 2 questions. Yes. Okay, I'll give you my microphone. So guys, you have a chance to ask one.
So there's a lot of talk about increasing tariffs in the United States. Is this something that's happening all around the world, or is it just Trump coming up with this idea of doubling and tripling tariff rates, and is that not a tax?
Obviously, it's a tax. I mean, it's an involuntary payment to contribute to government revenues. Obviously, it's a tax. And the answer to your question is, I don't know of any other countries that have this policy of raising tariffs, unless they do it to retaliate against Trump's tariffs. So in that sense, it has a doubling effect, where consumers are hurt twice.
Well, I know about tariff on EVs, electric vehicles, from China, imposed in Europe quite recently. Yeah. Because European Union, you know, European Union wants to be always on the front of this green revolution, and they wished to also be a leader in EV production. And yet, what happened? China is number one, far over European Union, and the way how they want to change it is through tariffs, through taxation. So I know about this example.
They did the same thing with Chinese solar panels.
Yes, and the Chinese solar panels. So of course, it's hard to outbeat Donald Trump on this issue. He mastered it. He even said that tariff is his new favorite word. Tariff, tariff, tariff. But it's not only him. To some degree, that happens now in the European Union and perhaps other countries.
Hi, Randy Hilkema. I just wanted to point out, I think, Jacek, you made a comment that you didn't think we'd see the 70% rates coming back again, but it's maybe not quite so far away if you get the wrong parties in here, if you look at the state taxes as well, because, for example, with California, we have 13% top rates, and that with the federal rates, and many on the left, including my own congressman.
Could you keep the microphone closer to your
from
mouth?
Silicon Valley congressman is proposing payroll taxes, which amount to about 15% on all income, all the way up. And you add that up, you get to about 65%. And on top of that, they want to raise the marginal rates on just ordinary income anyway. So, you know, it can happen, so it takes some eternal vigilance, I guess. So it's not really a question, it's a comment. But.
Maybe it's time to move to Texas.
I think so.
Yes, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to Jacek and Toine. Thank you so much, guys.